tax credit. And what we are finding is that those credits, when people claimed them, in some cases triggered application of the alternative minimum tax. So it was kind of a counterproductive and counterintuitive situation where the legislature said, we want to give you a tax credit if you're a manufacturer or an egg producer, or if you do R&D in our state, but then we're going to essentially take it on the back end from the AMT tax. And so what the legislature did is they exempted the manufacturing and agricultural tax credit, the research and development tax credit, and the historic rehabilitation tax credit from the alternative minimum tax to preserve what we think was their original intent, which is to provide a meaningful tax credit on those items. So all told, you know, when you look at the income tax cut in the state budget, and there was a $100 million property tax cut in a special session in November, and then the additional income and property tax cuts that were done as part of the special session from the surplus this year, the legislature cut taxes 3 times this session for a grand total of about $2 billion. And we think that's significant, and we think that as I said before, doesn't get us where we need to be from a taxation standpoint. I mean, even with these changes, which we support, Wisconsin will continue to be a high tax state and above average, but we're making progress in the right direction, and I think that's an important thing to be doing. Before I move on, I just want to mention, because we did, talk about cutting taxes with the budget surplus, and if you've been reading the newspapers for the past week or so, you've probably been hearing about a $1.8 billion structural deficit. And that's just so that everybody's clear what that is, that's a calculation based on our current spending levels. When the legislature is sworn in January of 2015, the governor probably around February or March of that year will introduce a budget setting the state's taxing and spending priorities for the 2015-2017 2-year period. If we have no revenue growth and no changes in spending between now and then, we would start out at 1.77 billion in the hole. What I think is important to realize, though, is that we will have, in all likelihood, not only increased revenue growth, because we've been seeing things like wage growth and so forth, but we'll probably see spending changes that would bring that number down as well. And I think it's an important distinction when we think about the legislature passing budgets for state agencies. That sets a ceiling on what they can spend, not a floor. So just because, for example, an agency is authorized to spend, $5 billion, doesn't mean that's how much they have to spend. That's a maximum of how much they can spend. So I think, we won't know if there's a deficit in fact or not when we get into the next fiscal year beginning June of 2015. But we'll see how tax collections come in, and we'll see how the state does from spending in the current budget. Any questions on that before I move on to the non-fiscal issues? If not, a couple of items that we thought were significant. First of all, the Fast Forward job training grants. We, as I think many of you know, have a disconnect between the skilled jobs that are available in sectors like manufacturing and construction trades and in healthcare versus the workers who are out there with those skills. And so we've been doing a lot as an organization to try and focus on ways to reduce this skills gap. And we think that the training associated with the Fast Forward job training program, as well as the creation of the labor market information system, which is a comprehensive database, not just of the jobs that are out there and what skills are needed to fill them, but as well a database of workers who have very specific skills that may be attractive to employers. And I think the challenge has been lately, how do we link up employees with these skill sets with employers who need them, and I think that database is going to be very helpful. Another issue, time record keeping. I was surprised to learn that we actually have a requirement, or I should say had a requirement on the books, that even salaried employers, employers were required to keep track of salaried employees' lunch breaks and so forth, and document on timesheets when salaried employees took their lunch and how long they were out and so forth. And it was information that the Department of Workforce Development never really enforced or collected from anyone unless they decided to, make a special project out of the business. And we just kind of felt like there's really no public policy purpose being served of having businesses report to the government when salaried employees take their lunch break. So we asked the legislature to repeal that requirement, and so they did. Hourly workers, of course, they still are required to keep track of that type of information. And then electrician regulation. There was a law passed a number of years ago that requires electricians to be licensed and credentialed in the state, which we think makes sense. The problem we are running into is that the law applied the licensing and credentialing to even in-house electricians working not as a contractor who would come into your home or your place of business and do work, but who just did electrical work for their employer on premises at a manufacturing facility, for example. And so we had a situation where employees who had been doing electrical work for on the shop floor for their employer for 10, 20, 30 years even, were now not only required to get credentialed with the state and go through a lot of training, but then have their work supervised directly by a master electrician. And we thought that was a little bit too much on the regulatory side, so we asked them to basically exempt in-house electricians who only work on the premises of their employers from that requirement, and we were able to get that passed as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
On the waiting list, for reducing the waiting list for on-demand industries in the tech colleges,
Yeah.
are you guys addressing, and is it happening? I don't know, but I know there's a big boom in North Dakota. Are those students staying in the state, or are they being recruited to go to North Dakota? I'm thinking like for welding, where I know they need thousands of welders out there. Is that something you guys have addressed or looked at?
Well, there are, yes, it's very well known in the manufacturing sector, for example, that probably some of the three most in-demand skill sets are welding, being a trained CNC operator, and having just general machinist skills. And so our technical college system is responding to that market demand and trying to expand their offerings and their programs in that area. Having said that, we're in a national, if not international, labor market. And as much as we hope people who are trained in Wisconsin stay to work in Wisconsin, if you can basically go out to the oil fields in North Dakota and write your own ticket, either as a welder or in construction. They've got people living in temporary housing because they don't have enough home builders out there to build houses fast enough for the people who are moving out there to work in the fracking industry. So there's no guarantee that we can keep those workers here. because the wages out in North Dakota right now are just incredible. I mean, they're flying Wisconsin workers in on a weekly basis I had heard, to work at Menards, for example, to work at the home improvement stores out there. So that's kind of an exceptional thing that's going on right now. I don't think it's indicative of our broader labor market, but no question that there is huge competition for welders and machinists right now.